Welcome to the Ableton device mini-series part 2. This time we'll be covering dynamics processes such as compressors, multiband compressors, gates, limiters, and this device called utility. The first thing I guess you should know is that a dynamics processor is something that alters the dynamics of a sound. Dynamics such as volume and attack, decay, sustain and release, so how long it takes for the sound's transient to become fully apparent, how long it takes to go down into a plateau of volume, how long that plateau of volume lasts and how loud it is, and then how long before the sound goes back down to 0 decibels, or in digital world, minus infinity. So how long it takes for it to go back to the lowest volume of the program. Basically the dynamics is the lowest and the loudest sound in a program. So for instance, in this hit here, the dynamics would be, if we go here and look, so it starts at minus 0.61 and it ends at, I'll just cut the rest of this off so I can check, minus 18. So the dynamics here is minus 18, about 18 dB of dynamics just in this hit right here. That's about 18 dB of dynamics, and we can alter that with a compressor. So the controls on a compressor, we'll start from the top corner and work our way down. So essentially the envelope, the peak, these are 3 different compressor settings. So the peak is basically, it responds to really sharp peaks, and that's probably the one you'd be using on drums. Whereas RMS, which stands for root mean square, it still responds to peaks, but it does it slightly slower, and the release phase is a bit slower. And opto, which stands for optical, it's basically has just a really weird curve on the end of it for the release, which is sometimes what you want. For this we'll just be using peak. So the next control that we'll look at is the threshold. The threshold is it determines when compression starts. So the further we bring this down and the signal reaches over that threshold is when the compression actually starts to take place. The attack and the release are time constraints. So as we bring the attack down or up, it's how long until the compression starts, and then the release is how long it finishes after the attack has already come in. So if we have this at 1 millisecond, it'll take 1 millisecond for the compression to start, and then 62 or 62.2 milliseconds after that, 1.16 milliseconds to finish. The ratio can be thought of as gravity. It's how hard the sound gets pulled down to the floor, which is the threshold. And the knee is the curve of that ratio. Down here we have the model types, model FF1 and FF2, if you were into Ableton before Live 8 or Live 6 even. They had these compressor models called Compressor 1 and Compressor 2, and that's exactly what these are. This is Compressor 1 and Compressor 2. They just sound slightly different, but not very, I would say. And FB, which stands for feedback, is it's kind of based on classic compressors, such as like Uris and drummers and such. It's trying to emulate them basically. With the feedback, you might notice we don't get the look ahead option anymore. It becomes grayed out, and you definitely kind of want that sometimes to have the control of how reactive the compressor is. Although I guess the more reactive it is, probably the more processing power it takes up. But I don't really think it's enough to sort of matter. See, if we have it on 0 milliseconds, I'm still at 1% up here on the CPU bar, and if I turn it to 10 milliseconds, again I'm still at 1%, so I don't really think it matters. So we'll have it at 0 milliseconds. Basically that's saying we can look into the future. As soon as the sound happens, the compressor will take place. 1 millisecond is probably the shortest time you'll get on a hardware compressor. If we put it on feedback, actually we can move this to 0, put it on feedback. Yeah, it doesn't change, but it doesn't matter. You don't even get a look ahead function with that one. And then the makeup gain essentially is how much makeup we have on the output in case we make it too quiet with these other controls. So I'll just quickly go through and show you some settings. So I'll put the threshold back to 0. So if we start playing this now, it should have no effect at all. I'll just turn this down. -8. So yeah, it has no effect at all at the moment, and as we start bringing the threshold down, you'll hear it starts to affect it slightly. So now we're affecting 18 dB of the signal, or -18. Anything that's -18 or over, which is what we found was the lowest part of the program anyway, is being affected. So in theory we're affecting every part of the signal, having it at -18, so there's no point in going lower than that because it'll just be affecting the same amount anyway. You can see there's not a huge amount of difference happening between -18 and -50. Maybe in like classical music or jazz music where there's a lot of dynamics there might be, but most of the change for us is happening between 0 and -18, and I'll just show you again. So that's where the biggest change happens, around that top part there, because we already checked that the dynamics were around that amount of volumes. Excuse me. So the next part is the ratio. If we bring this ratio up, basically compresses it harder. So I'll just show you that. It's pulling all of these parts of the sound up. So if I just check that dynamic again, I'll just get rid of this. So this part of the signal, which used to be -18, if I check that now, it's now -19, so it's been pulled down slightly. No, it's -14 now. So it's gotten a little bit louder, it's gotten 4 dB louder. And if we want to match that, we can go to the makeup gain on the output, turn that down, -4. It's -18 again, so that's where it was originally. So this is being compressed at the same volume that it was when we started. So now if I turn the compressor on and off, you'll be able to hear if what we've done is good or bad. You want to have the same output as you do input when the compressor's off, because we perceive loud things as sounding better automatically. It's just how we hear. Or actually that's kind of a generalized statement, but generally we'll hear loud things as being sounding better. So it's perceived as being louder because more of the signal is louder at the moment. All this part here is being pushed up slightly, and you can hear this sort of the air that it's producing from being pushed up like that. It sounds more like it's in a room, and if I turn it off, it sounds more like in your face. So the attack and the release are time constraints. Like I said before, how fast the compression starts and how long it takes before it stops. So if I turn that down and I turn the release, if I turn the attack right down and the release all the way up, it'll be being compressed as much as it possibly can. And we'll just turn the makeup gain back up to 0 and see what this part of the signal is now. Now it's -19. Around -18, -19. If we turn the look ahead onto 0, check it again. Around the same, -17. That's strange, it just keeps going up. It kept going up from -18 to -14 until we got to -14, and then it kind of plateaued there. That's kind of strange. Don't know why that happens. Now it's just at -14 all the time. We possibly just found a bug. I reckon that's a bug in Ableton. Maybe not. So yeah, that's essentially all the things to look at the compressor, except for this input right here. We have this whole section sort of to the left of the compressor. Once you press this little arrow, it opens up this big section here, or little section rather. And basically you can take your input from another source which isn't the channel here, so it's not being taken from the input of the audio, it's being taken from another input from another channel, and you can compress the signal. The threshold then becomes relative to that input. So if we create a MIDI track, and I'll just create a couple of sine waves that are on the beat, so I'll just throw an analog in there, turn the shape onto sine, and I'll just create some sine waves on the beats. We'll listen to that, make them lower, and then I'll go to my amp and I'll just bring the amplitude, sustain and decay in, so it's just sort of thuddy hits. Maybe bring the note down lower again. Maybe bring the filter down and the resonance up. If you're wondering, this is how to make a kick drum also. If you want to make a kick drum, essentially you just have one that's creating the attack like that, and then you create another one, just duplicate that. We'll call this one beta, and call the next one body, and then just bring the amplitude out a bit, turn that one down. There we go, you made a kick. Then we can use a compressor to to compress just the attack of that by making the attack and the release really short, and it'll just make that start punch of the kick nice and punchy. So we'll just turn those down so they're not clipping as much, sound a bit cleaner hopefully. Turn these down slightly more. Yeah, that's good volume. It's nice and punchy. And then you'd probably have to go through and EQ it obviously, so we'd go to the beta. Probably chuck an EQ in there. Get that nice 10K happening. So it's nice and clicky. Around there. Maybe chuck a slight little reverb on it, just to get a bit of reverb in there. Maybe put your own compressor just on that attacky bit, just so I can compress the attack of it. Just solo that. Then we could use utility, or we could just use this compressor right at the end to turn it down a bit, so it's not clipping. Just a little bit more. Yeah, so I got a bit off track there, trying to make a kick drum, but yeah, some people might find that interesting. Sorry about that. Alright, so now we've got our chain input. So we'll go back to audio from, turn the sidechain on, we'll go audio from instrument rack, which is our kick that we just made. And now you can see the input that's coming in is now that kick that we just made. And then basically what's happening now is it's being compressed to that sound, it's not being compressed by its own signal anymore. So if we bring this down, it should start to sound like it breathes if we turn the release down. And that's exactly how house bass is made. So if I just create another MIDI clip here, I'll just create a little short one, and just show you exactly how to get that house sound. So I chuck an analog in, chuck a couple of bass hits in there. Might just create a bit of a chord. So we've got a D sharp, go F sharp. Maybe make those notes a bit lower. Just get all of them. Maybe bring these ones up. Let's bring this bass note down on this here. So you can see it's giving no room for the kick at all, it's just totally eating away at that kick. I might just add another oscillator, slightly detune and have one an octave higher. So at the moment it sounds like shit. We put a compressor on there, we open it up, get the side chain, take the audio from the instrument rack, which is the kick, then I bring my threshold down, play with my time constraints a bit, and then it should sound perfect. You might just group that into a rack, call that house, and then get another one, call it sub, and then this one I'll just have sine waves. You can see I'm getting a few clicks there, clicks and pops. If I go to model FF1, which is the original compressor from Ableton 6 or 7, I can't remember, and then go to look ahead 0, it gets rid of a lot of them for us, and mess with my release and my ratio, and I should get rid of them. Play with the knee. That's a bit better than it was. So now we play that together. Next one there. Goes for one longer. And then you could do an overall EQing on it as well, but that's a really classic use for compression in electronic music, sidechain compression. So that's enough on the compressor. The last thing to look at is just the EQ, and that just determines which frequencies you're compressing to, so I'll just go over that quickly actually. If I solo this and listen to it, then I turn this EQ on, I can tell this EQ to just be to just react to low frequencies, like really low frequencies, by turning the frequency down and putting it onto a low pass shape. So you can see now it's just reacting to sub, which will just take all the bass frequencies coming from the kick and sidechain it to that. Or I can do the same thing to high frequencies. And that might sound cool if I bring that down from there and automate it to come down. That's kind of cool. You can do the exact same thing by automating the threshold down or automating this gain to go up. If I turn this gain up, basically it just means the signal coming in is louder. As I turn it down, there'll be no compression, and as I turn it up there should be more, so we'll just listen to that. And then the dry wet, it's exactly what it says, dry and wet. Unaffected is dry, wet is fully affected. So we can turn that up and see what that does. So that's a few ways to achieve the same thing. Alright, so we'll move on. We'll move on to the multi-band compressor. So it's the exact same as the regular compressor, but instead of just having one band to compress on, we have three. We have a high frequency, mid frequencies, and low frequencies. So if I play around with the constraints on the low frequencies, I'll just be messing around with the low frequency compression. And if I mess around with the parameters on the high frequencies, I'll just be messing around with the compression on the high frequencies. And the mid frequency, you can see there's no parameter for what frequency that is, and that's because you set it with the highs and the lows. So say I have my lows set to 350 Hertz and then I have my highs set to 4K. Everything between 350 and 4K is now the mids. So essentially if we turn this right down to 30 Hertz and we turn the highs right up to 15K, everything in there is basically the whole compressor is just on the mid frequency. We have RMS and peak on this one, we don't have optical. So basically root mean square, so that's compression over a slightly less reactive time, and then peak just picks up on those really high transients. Then the soft knee, it's just a knee control, we don't actually have a fader for that control, it's just a button, so either you have it on or off. Input and output controls, which is essentially makeup gain. Then we have a final output control for all three of them being assembled back together. Not exactly sure what time does. We can open this and check. Time. The time control scales the durations of all the attack and release controls. This maintains the same relative envelope times, but makes them all faster or slower by the same amount. Alright, so it's just an overall attack release control, that's all it is. So if we turn, go to T, which stands for time constraints, attack or release, essentially we turn all these to different settings, and we can affect the low frequencies, the high frequencies, we can have them all separate, or we can just overly affect all of them with this, so it's kind of like a trim control for all of these three. B stands for below, is all the thresholds and the ratios for the this side, and then above, or A, is the ratios and thresholds for this side. So it's pretty similar to the regular compressor, although it's in 3 bands, and we can recreate that if we create an audio effect track. We go create chain, call that high, duplicate it, call that low, duplicate it and call one mid. I'll just chuck mid in the center for more aesthetic purposes, and then we chuck an EQ 8 in all of them, and then low will make everything below 350 Hertz, mid will make everything above 350, and everything below 4000, and high should be everything above 4K, and then low should be everything under 350. And then if we give them all their own compressors like this, there we go. This is now a multi-band compressor, the exact same as what this one's doing. If we set that to 4000 and we set this to 350, this here is now the exact same as this here. We can basically just rename this multi-band compressor, and that's the exact same thing, but I find this a bit easier to understand. If I'm ever doing multi-band compression, this is the way that I do it. I don't do it like this. I rarely use this plugin simply because I'd just prefer to do it in a rack. Then you have, I don't know, a better volume control. You have panning options, which is, oops, what did I just do? Undo. yeah, you have panning options and stuff like that, which is something that you don't really have on this. So yeah, you have an on and off button for all the separate bands as well, and it's essentially the same here. You have that as well, and then you have a chain. You can create chains such as this, and then you can sort of automate this to jump through those different compressors, which is another cool function. So I prefer to do it this way, just because you have a couple more options and I find it slightly easier to understand. So the next one we move on to is the gate, and the gate works the opposite of a compressor. Instead of signals that exceed the threshold being affected, signals that don't exceed the threshold are affected. So if we chuck that on here and we listen to it, actually I'll do it on the kick. So I'll chuck a gate on the kick. Bam. So at the moment everything's exceeding the threshold, so nothing's being affected. As I bring this up and the signal doesn't exceed the threshold, it starts to be affected and you won't hear it anymore. And essentially that's what a gate does. It's imagine a gate that opens and closes for sound. If the sound isn't loud enough, it doesn't open, and once you bring this down and tell the sound that it can be a certain volume before the gate opens, then it starts to open. So if we bring the attack down, basically this is the same time constraints as the compressor. It's how quickly it starts to affect it. And then the hold and the release can be thought of as two release controls. The hold is essentially the first release. So if we have that at 5 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds after the attack happens, which is instant, we have the signal starting to return back to its natural state. And then the second release, if we turn that right down, basically the first release will just determine everything, and then the second release is how long after the first release, which is hold, it returns back to its natural state. So at the moment 10 milliseconds before it returns back to its natural state, but if we turn this right down, then 5 milliseconds is all we need. So if we listen to this, it's 5 milliseconds before it actually gates it. So what we're getting there, all those clicks and pops, is something called hysteresis. And that's bad. Some gates have a hysteresis control, but this one doesn't. So yeah, we can't really talk about that too much. So I'll just play around with the hold and release and get it sounding nice and gated. Then we have this floor option, which is how low below the volume that's coming in it drops. So if we have this at 0, it does nothing. And as we bring it down, it starts to drop more and more in volume until minus infinity, which is complete silence. And then we have a sidechain input. So I'll chuck that on the bass just to show you again. I don't really hear this too much on bass, not as much as the compression anyway, but basically if I tell the input to come from to instrument rack, which is our kick drum, and then every time that kick comes in, the bass will open, and every time it's not playing, the bass won't be heard. Let's listen to that, turn that off solo. So every time the kick's playing, the gate is allowing the bass to come through, and when the kick isn't playing, it's telling the bass to not play. So that's about all there is to look at on the gate. The same things as the compressor sidechain. We have a gain and a dry wet, which is the exact same as the compressor, how high the signal is coming through and how much the signal is affecting the threshold. So I'll just turn that off and delete it. The final things we have to look at is the limiter and the utility. The limiter, the utility is pretty simple. There's a width control which determines how much is the signal is in the sides of the speakers and how much is in the center. So if we just put that on our bass and we turn the width all the way down, I'll just put a utility on there, turn the width all the way down. So everything's completely centered at that point. At 100% it's just natural, and at 200% everything goes to the sides of the speakers. You can't even hear it, it's too wide. So we bring it down. You can hear just a slight amount just in the sides of the speakers, and as I bring it back it becomes more centered. Then we have a gain control. I use this gain control for gain automations, like so. So at the end of my final mix down, I can just deal with the volumes here, and I don't have to worry about getting my volumes automations and highlighting all of them like so, and then moving them up or down if the track's too loud or not. So I do all my automation for gain and panning on the utility, just so I have an extra trim control up here on the master when I'm doing my final mix. And then yeah, we basically have a stereo left-right swap that trades places of the left and right. I put in separate speakers, the opposite speaker left, right, stereo, mute, turns everything off, DC, and then we can put one side out of phase with the other and make it sound weird. And that's basically all there is on utility. I count this as a dynamics processor because it deals with pan and gain, although it possibly could be thrown into mixing effects or something like that. Some form of dynamics processing, I believe. So we'll just get rid of this utility now. And the final thing to look at is the limiter. We have a gain control, like the compressor. We have look ahead, except it only goes to 1.5 milliseconds. We have a release, and we have a ceiling, and essentially what a limiter does is it doesn't allow volumes to go over a certain volume. So if we have this fader set at 0, we turn this gain right up with the ceiling. Oh, we'll just leave the gain where it is actually. So as it is now, the signal is roughly around -12, so if we put this ceiling at -15, you see there as the peak, it won't allow anything to go over -15. No matter how hard we push this gain, it won't go any higher than that. Although it's totally maximized the signal is always going to be at -15 now. And as we bring this ceiling up, it'll be that volume of the ceiling now that we've pushed the gain up 24 dB. You can see that that level is extremely consistent now, as opposed to before without it. It's varying in level a fair bit. And essentially what a limiter is just a compressor that has an infinite ratio. So if we put an infinite ratio on the compressor, turn the threshold right down. That's essentially the same thing, it's just otherwise what you might have heard before is a brick wall compressor or a brick wall limiter. That's exactly what that is. It just hits a wall and just stays at that volume. So that's about all the dynamics processors that Ableton has to offer. I hope you got something out of that. If you want to send me an email about it, and if you have any questions, feel free to go to the contact section of this website and send me an email. And yeah, next time we'll be going over time-based effects, so hopefully you'll wait for that. And yeah, thanks for watching, thanks for your support, and yeah, take care.